In this video lesson, we're going to learn to identify the independent and dependent quantities. There's the directions there. Determine the independent and dependent quantities in each scenario. In class, I gave you 5 different hints. The first hint was that time is usually the independent quantity. Anything like seconds, minutes, hours, days, weeks, months, or years, anything associated with time will usually be independent. Hint 2 was cost is usually the dependent quantity. So anything with the money value. Step 3 was find the word per. When you identify the word per, whatever is previous to per is going to be dependent. Whatever is after per will be the independent quantity. And so in class we use $5 per pizza if we were going to Little Caesars. Therefore pizza would be the independent quantity, and cost in dollars would be the dependent quantity, which is also a hint of number 2. Cost is usually dependent. The next hint I gave you was whatever comes first in the problem is usually independent. So whatever the situation is, whatever's happening first. Again, in class we use how many eggs I used or the number of cakes I baked. To bake a cake, we got to use the eggs to make the batter before we put it in the oven and bake it. Therefore, using the eggs would come first, which would be independent, and baking the cake would come second, which is the dependent quantity. And the 5th hint, just overall, is just asking what quantity depends on the other. So if you can't use hints 1 through 4, then you're going to have to ask yourself which quantity depends on another quantity. So let's look at an example here. Selena is driving to visit her grandmother, who lives 325 miles away from Selena's home. She travels at an average rate of 60 miles per hour. Here we have 2 hints. The first hint we have is the word per. So again, like explained earlier, whatever is after per is going to be the independent, and whatever is before per is going to be the dependent. The other hint is we said anything with time. So in this case, hour is usually going to be independent. And so there we have it again. Independent would be time in hours. Dependent would be distance in miles. So then we would just fill that in. We'd have to say the independent is time measured in hours. You must put both words. And then dependent in this case is distance. And the distance is measured in miles. Sometimes we could use height or depth if we're underwater. The next question will be labeling your axis. Okay, it says label the axis of each graph with the independent and dependent quantities and the appropriate units of measure. The first thing you need to do is, just like the previous slides, we need to identify the independent and dependent practice, or independent and dependent quantities, I should say. All right, once we have identified them, we need to know where to put them. Okay, the independent quantity will always go on the x-axis. So here we have the x-axis. So the independent, whatever that is, time in minutes, time in seconds, whatever you identify it as, will always go on the x-axis. Whatever you identify the dependent quantity as will always go on the y-axis. So I'm just going to turn this sideways because usually we're going to write it like that. And therefore we'll do one more example. Here's a problem. Madison enjoys bicycling for exercise. Each Saturday she bikes a course she has mapped out around her town. She averages a speed of 12 miles per hour on her journey. So again, we see the word per. Okay, that's going to help us identify independent and dependent. Whatever is after per is independent. Whatever is before per is dependent. Also, another hint is we have another measure of time. So time, in this case, measured in hour, again, will be the independent quantity. And then distance in miles will be the dependent quantity. Excuse my writing there. And then, like the previous slide we just saw, independent always goes on the x-axis. All the graphs will have an x and a y on it. And dependent will always go on the y-axis. And that concludes our lesson for today.